Today I will be discussing some of the key dimensions of this work, both in terms of the key focus areas, but also the kinds of contexts and sites and networks through which I've been completing this research. And I must say it was a slightly difficult exercise to think about an overview of the three-year research program in this way. So it's not a comprehensive report, but I guess a quick summary, a whistle-stop tour, if you like, of some of the key sites that I've been working at and within. So first, just worth clarifying my approach to the way that I'm thinking about digital cities and the kind of production of digital, the digital life of cities, if you like. Obviously, for geographers, urban studies researchers, the ways in which we think about the constitution of the urban through the impact of network technologies and digital technologies and infrastructures has been an interest for some time. So my work is very much situated within that field, and the project that I was funded to complete was called Platform Urbanism, and that really signals, I suppose, the question around, well, how are digital platforms and their architectures, how are they reconstituting the production and governance of urban spatiality? I suppose the way that my methodology and my approach to this research is to look at underlying digital infrastructures and practices, but also to think about the kinds of digital imaginaries that influence the way that we think about what the city is. So this is, I guess, something that I like to combine, both economic and other kinds of practices of digital infrastructures with ways of thinking and being and experiencing cities through digital technologies. The projects that I've undertaken have been geographically diverse. So I have been working at sites within New York in the Centre for Urban Science and Progress, but also the UK. I've looked at a number of sites within the UK, particularly with the rise of the smart cities movement, and also in Australia as well. The interest that I wanted to, I guess the perspective I wanted to share today was to think about these sites, not just geographically in terms of their locatedness within particular cities, but the different sites of urban practice that they have embodied. So that's how I've decided to sort of structure the content of this talk through the three sites of urban practice, being that of the creation of urban dashboards and the production of urban science in that context, also city benchmarking and the rise of smart cities, and then finally through the notion of platform architectures. I must say that it has been a challenge, but something that I've kind of wanted to think through, and I want to do more in the coming months as well, is to think about researching quite a dramatically evolving space that is, I guess, the digital innovations around machine learning, open data, big data, and so forth, to actually be across those technology developments, but also to be able to critically evaluate how to think about those in the way that they are affecting conditions of urban governance. So that has necessarily meant that I've sort of at times operated at the margins of a traditional research kind of context, and actually looked at the field work as being within sites of policy and practice as well. So just in terms of that first area of urban dashboards and open data, when I began my research program, I was very interested in the role of particular data intermediaries in kind of constituting what was an open data agenda for a lot of cities, particularly across the US, but also the UK. So I spent some time at the newly constituted Centre for Urban Science and Progress at NYU, where I kind of looked at the ways in which this idea of being able to understand the city through the notion of big data and open data and through partnerships with city governments, the way that this was actually practiced by an institute. There'd been quite a number of kind of critical responses to this notion of urban informatics and to visions of the city through a data-driven infoscape, if you like. But I was interested in understanding, I suppose, how different groups of people, municipal agencies, as well as data scientists, as well as citizens and developers, all kind of came together at different forums to kind of think through the ways in which dashboards and other kind of front-end models actually constituted the city. So that led to a kind of series of publications and articles that I have really focused on a shifting of the agenda, particularly within the open data movement, from what was essentially a kind of much more of a transparency agenda to try to promote the ideal of open government towards, I guess, a kind of refinement of that agenda around the needs of software entrepreneurs. And so that's some of the publications that I've been working on, or are in or they've all been approved but are in not all out yet. That essentially looking at the ways in which the practices of digital entrepreneurship in these instances have come to increasingly dominate the ways in which government agencies think about the potentials of a data-driven model. As part of my work, I've also been at the same time practicing some of the alternative approaches that I've been seeing through the notion of city dashboards in particular. So I created a dashboard for Parramatta, which is a kind of a city within which the ICS is based, leading to then a lot of advisory work with local, state and federal governments to support dashboard making, if you like, at those levels. This work has also been, I've published through a website, Cities Plus Data, and where you'll see examples of the dashboards and other work that I have been undertaking. As I said, the work that I was doing, I guess this is now from 2015 and early 2016, led to my being much more connected, if you like, to the discourses of smart city policy making, the connections with CUSP in particular, led to my kind of being in a bit of a hotspot in Australia as the smart city agenda kind of really took off. So we were in Australia, there was a bit of a laggard status, if you like, in the adoption of smart city policies and models. And I guess in my position, I was looking very closely at not just the production of the smart city, but also the kinds of governing and partnership conditions that you would need to really flesh out what that agenda would mean for a municipal government. So I have, and this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek image here, as you perhaps might guess, I have been mixing with these types, and I must say there is a paper in the works on gender bias within the smart city policy discourse. But there's essentially, as we all know, a push towards a much more quantitative approach to city benchmarking. And my experience has been to really work with some of these agencies in thinking through what are the available data resources that cities have to enable a more quantitative benchmarking around livability, connectivity, and so forth. And my finding in this process, through quite arduous amounts of, if you like, data harvesting for entities such as the Greater Sydney Commission, a municipal agency that was based on the Greater London Authority here, but also advisory work to our National Cities unit in our Prime Minister and Cabinet, has been to really help decision makers come to terms with the notion that, in fact, city governments are quite poor, data poor in the kinds of resources that they have to work with, and that, in fact, the great deal of work in kind of shifting towards any semblance of a smart city approach is to actually think through appropriate and long-term data partnerships with particular technology agencies and other sorts of alliances. And so that's led to a kind of larger and longer term investment in data infrastructure for Australian smart cities. And that was announced by our Federal Minister for Cities and Digital Transformation at the end of last year. The other dimension to the work that I've been doing in terms of thinking through this kind of quite generic, I suppose, model of what the city is to, I guess, work with local governments, including Parramatta, but also other developers as well, to think through, if you are going to look at a set of kind of ideal indicators for a city, then what are the kinds of groups that you want to curate around those? So that's been another area of focus for me, with a couple of publications coming out that really explores the smart city as a generic context and the ways in which they become localised in particular places. I'm going to skip through this, but just to say that there has been, I guess for about 18 months or so, a lot of my research was focused on some quite big picture, if you like, strategy and policy impact. So these are a listing of some of the achievements in that domain. So as I said, a national data governance strategy for smart cities, a working paper for our Committee for Sydney on some of the challenges of working towards a data smart responsive city, roadmaps and other digital advisory reports for Greater Sydney Commission, as well as a journal article there on Parramatta as a smart city. More recently, though, so that was kind of occupying quite a bit of my time for about a year as the sort of smart city agenda picked up in Australia. But I guess in the more recent times, more recent months, my focus has returned to, I guess, a more of a critical place in relation to the theory of platform urbanism that I essentially set out to undertake and to kind of develop in the course of the fellowship. I guess I found it a challenge, and I want to be open and honest about this, if you like, to say in 2013, it was very difficult to actually do a theory of platform urbanism. Since that time, there has been a huge escalation in theoretical and critical work around the nature of the platform, which has in a sense, validated my work, but also been required, I have felt, in order to kind of establish that critical framework. So platform capitalism is now an emerging area which really looks at the role of digital platforms as a very dominant mode of economic circulation. Platform studies has been around for some time within the media studies field, but has been very focused on, I suppose, circuits of communication itself, but not extending towards, I guess, the urban domain. So in more recent times, we've seen more and more of a focus towards the platform, the nature of the platform as infrastructure. The infrastructuralization of platform studies is now a kind of quite significant area, and it is a kind of an agenda that I am continuing to kind of progress. One of the sort of shorthand ways of understanding the platformization of infrastructure is the Uberization of everything. And that is something that we're seeing more and more as energy companies, utility companies, even the city and city municipal governments themselves thinking in terms of the logic of the platform. So this is just some of the theoretical or more engaged research that I've been doing around the nature of what the platform as infrastructure is. Some of this research has just been submitted. But it's really thinking through a major shift in what the digital means for the digital life of cities. To move from something that is an enabling space of participation, I guess, and a sense in which there is this engagement with citizens in a bottom-up kind of way, towards something quite different, that is where a space in which participation and interaction is encouraged, but via essentially monopoly and proprietary platforms. And I think we're really going to see over the next decade or so a lot more critical engagement with participation and digital participation that becomes an issue for city policy making, particularly as municipal governments, city governments, and governments at many levels actually lack the kinds of access to data that is required for effective urban policy making in a digital era. So these are some of the implications that I've been grappling with. I guess just to summarise here, from the platformisation of the web, which we all kind of know instinctively because we all check our Facebook or our Google or what have you. What happens when the platformisation of infrastructure continues to occur and be embedded within our cities? Are we looking at the end of splintering urbanism? I mean, that's a provocative kind of statement, but there is a push towards a much more of a monopoly service provision model there, as multiple kind of competing platforms kind of cohere into potentially one dominant platform. So what will that look like in a monopoly service provision kind of mode? Data shadows, what are the issues around government lack of access to a lot of data? What are the kinds of cooperatives, data collaboratives, data partnerships that will become more and more central to the practice of urban governance? And then what are the kinds of critical models or critical engagement with platform urbanism that are emerging? We've seen the concept of platform cooperatives. So thinking about different modes of kind of economic and financial investment around that platform model that may in fact enable benefits to be shared more widely. As I said, one of the key aspects to my contribution to this idea of the platform and its role in shaping our urban lives is not just in terms of the infrastructure, but also the forms of human interaction that we are seeing. What is it for our city spaces, our ways of knowing the city, and our spatial epistemologies when our engagement with the everyday urban is through these platform infrastructures? It's a critical question. I can't say that at the end of this time that all of these questions are answered. In fact, there is still some way to go, but I'm certainly extremely appreciative of the Urban Studies Foundation for the opportunity to, I guess, not only critically evaluate some of these rapidly developing areas, but also to do that in a way that engages with, dynamic areas of policy and practice as well. Thank you.